Good afternoon and welcome to the Preservation Association of Lincoln Brown Bag Lecture Series. My name is Eileen Burke and I'm the coordinator of these brown bags. Our videotaping today is sponsored by the Historic Preservation Fund of the U.S. Department of the Interior through the Nebraska State Historical Society in the City of Lincoln, a certified local government. Our speaker today is Ed Zimmer. Ed has been the Historic Preservation Planner for the City of Lincoln Planning Department since 1985. Ed is a native of Omaha and spent a decade studying and working in Boston, earning a PhD in American Studies from Boston University in 1984. While in Massachusetts, he freelanced as a researcher and writer for clients including Peabody Museum at Harvard University, Lowell National Historic Park, and the Smithsonian Museum of American History. Ed's talk today is on PAL's, the Preservation Association of Lincoln's 26th Annual Awards presentation, and it's titled, "And the Winner Is." Please join me in welcoming Ed Zimmer.
I start thinking maybe I should go for another degree or something, so Eileen will have something different to say, but not likely. So the winner is, of course, the 26th Annual Awards. And I always start with, PAL does a great job of choosing an interesting venue for those annual meetings. And this year went to a Ferdinand Fisk building, one of my favorites, the Grainger Warehouse at 105 North 8th Street, 8th and O in Haymarket, building that originally was one of the half dozen grocery wholesalers, and probably Grainger was the biggest of the wholesalers, with a whole block face from O to P and around the corner on P Street in Haymarket. This is the early drawing, mid-teens, early view with the rail cars up along the loading dock there. And when we were commencing the redevelopment of that building, it struck us as odd that that canopy roof draws water back into the face of the building. But if you're unloading rail cars, you don't want it draining into your groceries that you're unloading. So they piped it back into the building and handled it from there. And when the building was renovated, the same was done. In its late days before the renovation, when it was pretty much vacant, and then in 1993 renovated Grainger. Now a building with retail on the first floor, and I believe 29 apartment units on the upper floors, and a project of the housing group that is a subsidiary of Historic Haymarket that did this building and the Hardy building at the north end of the district as well. The venue was at Bin 105, the wine shop, and I think we can see that PAL has been advancing its venues to places with more interesting offerings for these nice annual events. And had a good crowd, a nice little space that was set up for the awards presentation. The awards began with the Stewardship Award, stewardship of a significant property, and this year PAL had chosen a project involved with the Piedmont neighborhood. This is the 1924 plat for Piedmont that Charles Stewart initiated. Nice curving Cotner Boulevard that comes through, creating a lot of uniquely shaped lots, some very interesting land use provisions or land layout provisions in this plat, where he specified, rather than a covenant that said what your front yard was, that whatever your lot, you drew an X from one corner to the other, and that created the center of your lot, and the center of your house was to be within 10 feet of wherever that center point was. The effect was to set up each house kind of individually on whatever the shape and size of its lot was. Also created those wide sweeping front yards because the house wasn't up towards the front with a big backyard. So Piedmont has that kind of distinctive character that's pretty subtle, but I think comes largely from that notion of centering the house on its lot, whatever size or shape that lot might be. Stewart died in 38. The specific feature honored this year is one that we can kind of begin to see from this aerial photo. This is in 1957 when Loeffler had been built off to the west side of Piedmont. But on that, we can just barely read the 5 entry gates that have been created at the key entrances into the subdivision. At Cotner, and I will forget the second one along A, and 56th and A, 56th and Randolph, and up where Fall Creek comes off Randolph. The project involved both research and renovation. It's hard to find, you'd think we could find great photos of all of those gateways. Not so much. Both my mentor and inspiration, Jim McKee, and I searched, and Jim, of course, came up with some. I came up with an aerial view that you had to interpret with a magnifying glass. This was the gateway down at the Cotner and A, the only one done in brick as far as I know. But you also in this one see a little bit of the lamps that sat up on those gateways. Over at A and 56th, where that diagonal entrance came in, you can just see the shadows of the gate posts there. Doesn't maybe seem real familiar today because that street is blocked. Not only are the gate posts gone, but I go through there on my bicycle, pedestrians, bicycles only. And the one that remains, and the subject of this award, is the one up on Randolph at that nice diagonal where those beautiful limestone gates celebrate that entrance to Piedmont. Now, they had been in pretty tough shape. One of them had been hit and rebuilt. The other was losing much of its mortar. Here are a couple early views. And a interested citizen, not even a resident of Piedmont, but a brother of a near resident to the gates, Brad CARPER, started being concerned about the condition and the failing condition of those gates. Especially when your keystone starts to lose its support, you get worried on an arch. And Brad went door to door throughout the neighborhood, raising funds to put the gates back in good condition. They sit out in public right-of-way, so he got very familiar with city offices and public works. These aren't where you might put big limestone gates today, but it doesn't really make any sense to put them anywhere else. And commenced to do both a thorough renovation and then I think a particularly charming feature, look at some of the detail on these with the name and look at the before and after on the work done. The lamps were gone. He searched high and low, couldn't even get a full image, but we had that one partial image from the Cotner gates, and he had lamps rebuilt and then went to the extreme effort of getting those re-electrified and getting those hooked up onto the, I believe onto the streetlight system, and produced like a beautiful pair of lamps that light up now every night back on those gates. So in celebration of that lovely project and both a driving force of Brad CARPER and then the cooperation of the neighbors recognizing what a neat asset they had there, PAL's honoring that with the Stewardship Award for the Piedmont entrance gates. And here is PAL's president, Alex Roth, and Brad with his award at that ceremony earlier in March. we don't have the pause here that we have the annual meeting for the photography. So we'll just have a respectful moment of pause after each award. Second one, rehabilitation of a commercial or institutional building. And I like to start with building permits whenever I can. And this is the 1909 permit issued to H.E. Seidels for a building in the 1200 block of P Street. Originally a garage and an automotive building, although Seidels had a whole range of businesses, some of which he operated from here, selling radios. Earlier he had sold bicycles from a shop on the site of the NBC Center, the Wells Fargo Center. He was kind of, I think, always engaged in the cutting edge technologies, bicycles, phonographs, and then he decided that maybe the one that was really going to get big was automobiles, and that became one of his mainstays. Finished the building about 1911. Here we have also a 1930 view of the building when it's still H.E. Seidels. When I came to town, it looked like this and was often called WC's or Dinsdale's, and the brick had been painted. And Speedway Properties obtained the building, thorough renovation, and particularly put some of the very attractive downtown housing in the upper floors of the building, calling it Cadillac Lofts for one of Seidel's products sold in the building, and then kind of used the Cadillac as the emblem of the building, including this one that on an icy day had taken a wrong turn and ended up almost on the second floor, but not quite. On the interior, the gateway and the entrances and the railings of those loft units on the upper floors, lots of Cadillac emblems built into it, and a fairly distinctive, you'd remember which was your door going home off the P Street entrance, with this Cadillac sitting halfway through the entry. So Speedway Properties was PAL's recipient of the rehabilitation of a commercial building this year for Cadillac Lofts at 1228 P Street. And Craig Smith was there to receive the award for Speedway Properties. And you'll see Alex several times through here, and always that big smile. PAL has separated residential and commercial because there's such different scale of projects, and it's also nice to have more awards and to honor the variety of preservation activities that go on in the community. So this year looked to a man who had partnered with the Woods brothers in one of their less well-known businesses, a man named Daniel Kelly, who was with them in their stallion importing business. They had the upper part of this advertisement was their farm, or their sale barn, up near 33rd and Holdridge. Idlewild and Idlewild Park sit right on portions of that sales where they had this big field and a great big barn. They were importing draft stallions from Europe, England and Europe, Belgians and Percherons and Shires, the tractors of their day for Midwestern farms, and they brought them all the way to Lincoln, out to their farm, and here we have a sales day looking very much like the sales day for Woods Brothers subdivisions, where there's one salesman standing with each offering, but here with their big stallions spread across the field. And one of the early partners was Mr. Kelly. Kelly, for a time, had his own operation down near 33rd and A, part of what became both a subdivision and part of Antelope Park there. And he built his own house on a Woods subdivision, what was known as the Elm Park subdivision, at 28th and L Streets. About 1906, very early in the subdivision. This sat alone for a time on that corner. And if we cataloged all, and what would there be, 10,000 American Foursquare houses in Lincoln, and then sorted them out till we got to the top half dozen or maybe fewer. In the frame American Foursquares, this would be somewhere in that on one hand sort of count. Big, handsome, kind of fully tricked out bay window on the second floor, beautiful full-length columns on the porch, elaborate windows up in the attic, and a beautiful renovation that the current owners, Dan and Tamara SLOAN, have done in their years with the house. Gorgeous paint colors, white picket fence on the big double corner lot. The state champion cucumber magnolia tree in the south yard, whatever a cucumber magnolia is. I've never quite come by in the right time in the spring. I don't know if it has gorgeous flowers or not, but I love that name, cucumber magnolia. The oriel window on the south side, marking the staircase, because you can see halfway up the height, midpoint between first and second floor. A big circular window on that side. And then around on the north side, another bay window that then transitions from polygonal into rectilinear up above, and further elaboration up on that window. So just every aspect of the house beautifully built originally and then beautifully rehabbed and restored by the SLOANs. So for residential rehabilitation in this annual award, the Daniel Kelly House, 405 South 28th, and Dan and Tamara SLOAN were honored. We had great attendance at the annual meeting this year with somebody there representing every award category, and Dan and Tamara receiving their award from Alex. Integration of old and new is a fun category because it allowed PAL to reach out and honor projects that weren't maybe strictly historic preservation projects, but enriched historic buildings and historic neighborhoods. Sometimes that's a whole new building. This year, I think, was a unique but very appropriate honoring of the courtyard fountain project at the state capitol, an element that was intended to be built when the capitol was constructed in the 20s and early 30s, but was funding couldn't be accomplished, and there was a philosophy with that building anyway, and I think an excellent one, that some aspects of the final decoration, the final finishing of the scheme would be left for subsequent generations. And one of the last major ones of those was the fountains in the courtyard. Previously, the courtyards were handsome, and they're also a very integral part of the ventilation of the building and the natural light, so that offices on the inner sides of the building could have windows into those courtyards. And they were laid out with the flagstone paths reflecting the early paths around the Capitol. And they're handsome little pieces and views within the building, but they didn't have their fountains. And this project was to correct that, which was a major project, and it was a lot like building 4 ships in 4 different bottles, because they weren't craning in these features, and there's also a huge amount of infrastructure underneath each of these fountains to be built, and they had to do all of that within a museum quality, beautiful existing landmark building. So it's not a minor project in any way at all. Some of the substructure and the formwork that's going to be carrying the concrete footings, and it doesn't look so big until you see the man, notice the man in his yellow shirt. These are big footings. And then the basins have to be designed, sculpted, cast in bronze. And here's some of that work going on at the foundry. And then the separate pieces forming that whole basin welded up together into a single unit. And each of those diamond openings then marked with a symbolic representation in a generalized reference back to Native American symbolism for water and rain and its sustaining force in Nebraska and all life. And here's a sketch by Tom Casper of what symbols would be arrayed around each of those fountains and what position each of those would take. And one of my favorites is the turtle, with a clear association with water. And the turtle's kind of like us, part of its life in the water, most of its life on land. And one of the awardees this year is Tom Casper, who died last year, who had worked was a driving force on this project, had worked up to his last days on the fountains, and who had sketched out those drawings of the icons. And this image comes from Placemakers of Nebraska, a website about Nebraska historic architects, deceased Nebraska historic architects. And last year we had to update Tom's page, which was there in the index but hadn't been filled in because we'd lost Tom. And so we had an end date, and he's in Nebraska Placemakers. Project involved creating highways through the existing building, little fiberboard walkways to ship materials in and out, and here they're rolling in one of the basins itself down one of those. This would be the governor's corridor from the north entrance under the upper north ground floor entrance under the big stairway, and getting ready to place a basin, and how they looked in the bare courtyard with that beautiful pattern of the old walkways expanded to be the centerpiece, to be the framework for the centerpiece of the fountain. And then the dedication last year with the governor speaking, and he's just turned on the fountain in this image. So we now have the four courtyards finished out with the 4 fountains. It being the capital, there's still something to be done, of course, and what's to be done is the landscaping around the courtyard as well, but that will come in time. So the honorees for Integration of Old and New Award was the Courtyard Fountains Project, and the key staff who had worked on that from the office of the administrator of the Capital Commission, Tom Casper, Matt Hansen, and Bob Ripley. And Bob and Matt here with Mrs. Casper, Tom's widow, who was so kind to come to the event as well and share in the recognition of this award. Sometimes these get a little tricky because this year the committee had chosen to honor an aspect of the Placemakers project with the Great Commoner Award, the Preservation Education Award. It had been nominated by Dave Murphy, who I think of as the prime instigator and editor of this page on the Nebraska Historical Society's website, but he wanted the awardee to be me. I suggested it should be the whole project. That was not Dave's intention. He made that clear to me, and he wanted recognition for the pages and the contribution that I make whenever I get a chance, because this is just great fun for me. This is like popcorn, or I can't do just one. Beautiful site that Dave designed, and I see him as the intellectual author of this, to put in one place all the information we can find and others can contribute on historic architects across the state or who've done work in the state. So Frank Lloyd Wright has a page, but Ferdinand Fisk has a page. Figures we've never heard of and figures everybody has heard of, connected with their work in Nebraska. We found, kind of the notion was that Dave and I would empty our files before we passed on and have them all on this page. It takes a huge amount of new research to put up a good, respectable job trying to get the biography and history. And I've enjoyed it immensely, and Dave apparently, and I'm honored, enjoys my contribution to it. Just one example of the kind of page we built. I've spoken for PAL on this figure, F.W. Fitzpatrick, who was both an architect and a very highly talented renderer, particularly in watercolors. And on this page, we not only have biography, list of his projects, list of his articles, which I think we found well over 100, list of his renderings as we've been able to find them, and the Historical Society has a couple dozen of these spectacular renderings. This figure worked nationally, but he did a lot of work for Nebraska architects. Burlinghoff and Davis, Burlinghoff alone, Ferdinand Fisk, all are represented in the work done by Fitzpatrick. Apparently he would get in trouble with some of his clients for signing his own name to their designs. He was the artist, not the architect to these projects, although it got blurry in his own writing because he liked to claim he had won more competitions than anyone else in the world. Maybe if his clients had won more competitions through their designs. Sometimes he would sign his name to the signposts or the auto grills or other places. In one example, one Berlinghoff example, it just has his name as the artist, with Berlinghoff's name as well. The site also contains a lot of fine photography, much of it by Dave Murphy, or out of the archives of the Historical Society. I think it's a really rich resource, and just next month we'll have a visit to Lincoln by grandchildren in their 80s of one of these architects we've written about who was doing his work in Lincoln in the teens, coming to visit Grandpa's work in Lincoln. And they had seen what we've put up about Mr. Paul V. Hyland on this site. So it's working. We're putting the names out there. We don't score at the top of Google searches for any of these names, but we're usually second or third behind Wikipedia. That's not too bad. So put in if you can't find the site, put in George A. Berlinghoff and go to the second or third listing, and you'll be on this site. Placemakers of Nebraska, the architects. So at Dave's instruction and honoring a gift from him, I was the honoree of Great Commenter this year. I've been giving the talk, and then I had to step aside and get the plaque from Alex. So I am honored by Dave's recognition and by PAL's. City Center Award was not in the original group of awards PAL did, but soon was added to recognize certain projects that really weren't physical projects necessarily, maybe weren't place-based, but did enrich our lives in a vibrant city and particularly help support the vibrancy of the center of our city. Farmers Market, Star City Parade, those kind of events have been honored through this award. And this year, I think very wisely, PAL chose the sesquicentennial, and particularly the big birthday bash, the Salute to the Good Life spectacular held in September on Centennial Mall and celebrating the newly renovated Centennial Mall. It was a fireworks show. It was a laser light show. It was both. It was music. It was a big spectacular, using the Capitol as the backdrop and sometimes as the screen for this event. And it marked not the very last event of the sesquicentennial, but was sort of the grand exclamation point at the end of it. I assume that's an Arbor Day tree there on the Capitol. Maybe it's a cucumber magnolia. This would be graffiti, but it goes away when you turn off the lights, so it's the way to do it. Happy birthday party for Nebraska that was held border to border, but the grand spectacular was at the center of the city, and PAL wanted to memorialize that with the City Center Award for this year. And Jeff Searcy was kind enough to attend, who's both chair of the Capital Environs Commission, but also chair of one of the commissions that promoted the sesquicentennial and these events, and in Jeff's normal good fashion honored all the people who had played parts in it, and was a great recipient of honoring that event and the sesquicentennial celebration. PAL's also built in that every year the only benefit the president gets is they get to pick one of these awards just by themselves. If we wanted to double the president's pay, they could pick two of the awards. And Alexandra Roth, who has family roots deep in College View, wanted to celebrate some of the great things that are happening in College View, particularly on Prescott and 48th Street. This is looking west on Prescott from 48th, or from just east of 48th, in the 20s, when this would have been the separate village of College View. And on the left-hand side of this view, in the center here. The truck's probably backed up to the grocery store beside it, but the light-colored building there was the post office of College View. Haven't found a great early image, but here's a newspaper view of it from the 20s. It became better known, perhaps, and certainly to modern folks, as where you got donuts in College View, because it was Conroy's. For many, many years, Conroy's closed this location, although they maintain another, and the building was sitting there not in very sound condition. Right across the street, the second of the Mill coffee shop locations had renovated a whole series of buildings there, really from the corner back to the alley, and they sat and looked out across at this kind of important building across the street.
Who would you like to FaceTime with?
That was in pretty perilous
I
condition.
missed that. Who would you like to FaceTime with?
I'll just FaceTime with you folks and not with my phone. And Dan and Tamara from the Mill secured the building, began the renovation, and then looked for the tenant they wanted to be there sharing that special spot, and reached out to someone who had worked with them on a lot of their renovations, now up to their fourth Mill location, and found what they say is their ideal tenant in Clinton Collins and his home and closet store. And so the award went both to Dan and Tamara and Clinton Collins, their tenants in the old College View Post Office, Conroy Donuts, home and closet location. And I had to pick up Courtney in at least one of the pictures to put up on the wall, because Courtney was helping with the whole event. So this is Dan and Tamara with Alex again, and Clinton receiving the President's Award for that very nice renovation and a very fresh, beautiful little shop. Lost him from my immediate neighborhood because he moved from 33rd and A, 33rd and B, but he's prospering and we're glad. And then finally, the Helen ViSalus Award, the big one, the Lifetime Achievement Award from PAL. The list you want to be on. It's a great honor, and using the great name of Helen ViSalus with her permission, and she was a wonderful supporter of PAL. I had asked her since she had asked me to help get the group started, and I kept saying, I'm a city employee, this would be a private group, that really wouldn't be my responsibility. Have any of you ever tried to tell Helen ViSalus no? No chance, not a chance. So we just got PAL going. And then I said, could we use her name on this award? All we wanted was her name. She said yes, and the next year she said, and how much am I giving annually? And she then, the rest of her life, gave a very significant gift annually to PAL for her award, which she was already giving us all we wanted, which was her name. And she had been not only the mayor when the preservation ordinance was passed in Lincoln, but a trustee of the National Trust, a leader nationally in preservation. And this year we honored a brilliant young woman architect, Jennifer Honebrink, who is Lincoln and Omaha both. She's with the Alley Pointer firm in Omaha, a key force in preservation in that firm, and has worked on an amazing range of projects for a young architect. Brandeis Building in downtown Omaha, the Hughes Irons Building in Council Bluffs, Old Market Lofts in downtown Omaha, Mayfair Apartments, and our own Wyuka Stables, which would have taken more patience than anybody, because this was a project that was funded and defunded and funded and defunded for about 5 years. And Jennifer was there the whole time and finally was able to carry out beautiful renovation. And PAL is met in this lovely building as well. And a beautiful multi-use building with the theatrical use in the summers, 2 great meeting rooms in the building now, as well as being the home for the swans in the winter. So it's a true mixed-use building with some mix that few other buildings can claim. So the ViSalus Award this year went to Jennifer Honenbrink. And that is the Jennifer smile, because watch, same smile, same Jennifer. And she makes Alex look tall, which is also fun. And I can claim she was a student of mine. I don't think I taught her anything. I think she already knew enough by that time. But back when I was occasionally invited to teach at UNL, she was 1 year one of my brilliant students. At the end of this very nice award ceremony and very enjoyable event, attendees then were invited to go across the street and take a tour through a newly renovated building, which is always a great opportunity for PAL to see something that's both freshly done or, even better, in this case, something that's in process. And so directly south, across under the overpass from Grainger building, is the Schwartz building, mid-1880s grocery warehouse, one of the two great south gate posts to Haymarket, the Raymond on one side of the street, Grainger on the other. So in through the new front doors, where air conditioners had poked out through the wall for so many years, into ready to go for some great tenant on the first floor. Craig Geese led the tour, one of the principals and developers of this project, and the tour went from basement to the upper floors through finished units, ready to go units, and units that are still waiting their final finish and their final owners. Great end, I think, to a great ceremony, a great annual meeting. And with that, I've finished another And the Winner Is. Are there any questions, John?
I have a question.
John has a question. I will repeat his question after he gives it.
You mentioned the Highland family coming back.
Yes.
Is that Highland family that was the architect, is that related to any of the Highland families that have been here in the 50s, 60s, 70s?
I don't believe so. I don't think Highland Lumber, Paul, this question is whether the Highlands who are visiting are related to other Lincoln Highlands we know. Spelled the same, but Paul V. Highland was from Chicago, and then that family went to California, and I haven't found, but there's much I don't know. So I don't know that I can say yes to that. So far it's been no.
I was going to say I had the honor of touring the SLOAN home there at 28th and L in the 80s with one of the Christopoulos sisters, and they grew up in the house, and I think they owned the Acme Chili Parlor downtown, the parents did. But anyways, there's a room on first floor that she referred to as the ironing room. And I don't think we hear that too often today. And she goes, I don't know why we do that, because I don't iron anymore, she told me. And then the attic does have a ballroom, or it did. I don't know what they've converted it to, but it was where they'd have dances and such.
So
So
Becky,
pretty cool house inside.
Becky Martin has a close neighbor of the SLOAN house at 28th and L, has recollections of visiting it. What's the family name again?
Christopoulos?
Christopoulos were very long-time residents, and one of the things this house benefited by, I think, was long-time residents. It needed work when the SLOANs came into it, but it still had great survival of wonderful elements. And they've done a huge amount of work inside and out, and on the garden. It's fun just to go by, even when the cucumber magnolia is not blooming. Award shows aren't supposed to generate a lot of questions. You know, you could challenge any of them, but we just cut you off. So it's really okay if you don't have a lot of questions off this month. I'll leave lots of ignorance next time I present, and you can fill in, as usual. Thank you.